Hi, everyone. I am Charity Lighton with Silver Fern, and we've got the Master of Masters here with us. We've got Karan here. So I am known as the Chief Nutritionist for Silver Fern, and I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, Karan, but I'm going to use a Star Wars reference here because
Yes.
I remember when Luke Skywalker, whenever he needed to know something, he went to Yoda. So like I tell people, you're my Yoda.
I love it. Yes. Ask me, you shall. Any questions?
So Karan is a world-renowned microbiologist with many, many titles. We could go through all of those, or he can just wow you with all the things that he knows. And I thought what we would talk about, if it's okay with you, Karan, if we could pick your brain specifically on one topic that just keeps coming up over and over and over, and one that I'm even very passionate about, and that's fermented foods.
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Great topic to talk about. I'm a big fan of fermented foods. I should say that right off the bat.
Yeah.
A big supporter of people trying to do their own fermentation, doing it at home as much as you can. If you can't do it at home, purchasing high quality fermented foods or even starter cultures. I think there's a lot of benefits in all of that. So we should definitely address that. And then, of course, talk about the differences between fermented foods and probiotics. Is there a difference, and how do you distinguish them, and what are the important roles that each play? Those are some things that I get a lot of questions on as well.
Yeah. So the biggest thing right now that I'm hearing from people is, I love fermented foods, which is great. We're both like, of course. And so I guess my question for you, that probably our audience has, if I were one of those people that was consuming a lot of fermented foods, would I still have a need for a probiotic like one that is in a supplemental form?
Right. That's an excellent question. So let's first define what a probiotic actually is, right? So the World Health Organization is the authority on nutrition in the world. It's a conglomeration of research scientists and research institutions all over the world. They're really the global authority in all this. So the World Health Organization.
Okay, so can I interrupt you right there real quick?
Yep.
Just to make sure it's not Wikipedia.
Not Wikipedia, yes.
Okay.
So Wikipedia is not a source. I can tell you this, I've written numerous papers and publications, and if you ever cite Wikipedia as a source, your papers will get rejected immediately. People will think you're a complete novice at what you're doing. So do not use Wikipedia as a source.
Okay.
The World Health Organization, being the preeminent regulatory body for nutrition and health and wellness in the world, has defined probiotics and has a very scientific definition for what a probiotic is. I think they laid this out sometime in the 1980s. And this is now the accepted definition of a probiotic, right? It's simple, but it's very precise. The definition is, it starts off with a live microorganism, when administered at adequate amounts, confers a health benefit to the host. That's it. That incorporates everything that a probiotic should be and should do for you from a health perspective. The first part of the definition is probably one of the most important parts to distinguish it from other sources of microbial benefit. And I'll outline what a microbial benefit is to begin with, right? So the first part, being a live microorganism, is important because what the scientific definition says about a probiotic is it has to be a live microbe that makes it to the site of action, which typically is the large intestine. Now, some microbes do function in the terminal end of the small intestine as well, but it has to make it there alive. And in order to make it there alive, it has to have some really unique features, because the passage going from the outside environment through the stomach, through the upper GI, getting to those sites of action is a very, very harsh passage for a microbe. There's a number of hurdles that it has to get through in order to actually reach those sites of action alive. The first hurdle, of course, is even in the mouth. There's salivary amylase, there are secretory IgA, all these immunoglobulins that actually can bind up and neutralize these microbes and, basically fight them off. It's your first line of defense in your body. The second, and probably one of the most harshest environments, is the gastric system in the stomach. Mm-hmm. The pH can be as low as a pH of 1, even though something is called acidophilus, an acid-loving bacteria. pH of 1 basically kills 99.9% of all bacteria. pH of 1 is not an unusual pH for the stomach. And then A lot of people will say, okay, well, we can enterocode it and get it through the stomach, and then it should be fine. Well, no, people forget that there's two other hurdles for a bacteria to overcome in order to get to the site of action. The first one being bile salts. Bile salts in the upper GI are very, very powerful antimicrobials. So they kill off most of other bacteria. Anything that would have made it through the gastric system now has to be, now is typically susceptible to bile salts. Then if you make it through the bile salts, then in the next part of the small upper GI, you've got pancreatic enzymes. Pancreatic enzymes also have really strong antimicrobial activity. So those are the 3-4 major hurdles that microbes have to get through in order to get to the site of action alive and function as a true probiotic by the scientific definition. So if we go by the scientific definition, very, very few strains actually meet the definition of a probiotics. I will say that the vast majority of probiotic supplements out there in the marketplace don't even fit the definition. So when I start talking about a probiotic compared to a fermented food, I'm talking about a very special class of bacteria that actually have a natural capability to make it through the gastric system, the bile salts, the pancreatic enzymes, and then get into the intestines where they will live as live microorganisms and create really unique functions. Right?
Okay.
So that's a very important distinction.
So based off that distinction, I can already hear people's questions come into their mind. The first would be, okay, so are we getting a little too technical here? Why do I care that it makes it all the way down to the large intestine?
Right. And that's something to really think about. So let me give you a little premise behind this.
Yeah.
I lectured at about 53 conferences last year, right? So that's a lot. That's almost one a week.
Yeah.
And I was invited to a lot of them to lecture. And the reason I was invited a lot is because this is a topic that even doctors and health practitioners are trying to wrap their head around and understand. There's a few of us that are at the leading edge of the research and really, working hard to understand this new information. And then it's our job to disseminate the information to other health practitioners. So what you are hearing is something that even your doctor probably doesn't know about, or your favorite health practitioner, or your favorite e-doctor, whoever you follow online and things like that. Right. Now, why it's so important in order for a true probiotic to make it to the intestine is because it's supposed to colonize. What a probiotic is supposed to do is create an effective change to the microbiome itself. Right. So your microbiome is the vast collection of microbes, all of their genetic elements, and all of those, how they interact with the host. Now, in order for a probiotic to be effective and really do its job, it has to get there, live, and it has to produce a number of metabolites, immunological components. It has to produce things we call outer membrane vesicles, all these little signaling compounds, all these influential compounds that actually affect the rest of the microbiome. Because what we really want a probiotic to do is change the microbial environment with the gut to favor a healthier metabolism, a healthier immune system, and a healthier gut overall.
Okay, awesome. So we'll do more videos on silver fern specifically about just the metabolism and how that is affected by all that's going on in the large intestine. So for today, we address the importance that it's got to be alive. It's got to make it all through that gastric system, make it down there. So here's my next question. Does that mean fermented foods aren't doing that? And so what does that mean for fermented foods then?
Yeah, and in fact, I spoke at the Santa Barbara Fermentation Festival this last year. I was invited there to speak. My first statement there, and actually it was very well received, was fermented foods are not a source of probiotics. And
nobody booed you right then? They didn't just boo you off the stage?
They put the pitchforks down. They didn't come after me.
Okay.
And people took the opportunity to learn and understand why I would say something like that at a fermentation festival. Most people understand fermented foods to be a rich source of probiotics. But remember, I just defined what a probiotic is. It has to be a live microorganism that colonizes in the gut. Fermented foods are typically microbes that do a really good job at breaking down substrates, whether it's vegetables, it's fruits, whether it's dairy products, as in kefir, or in kombucha and other liquid type fermentation systems, breaking down those substrates either in an anaerobic, which is typical situation, or an aerobic fermentation environment, but it's doing so in a dish, in a vat of some sort, whether it's a clay pot, it's a stainless steel device, it's a glass jar, whatever it may be. Those microbes are excellent at breaking down those foods and producing high levels of nutrients from the breakdown of those foods. So what they're doing is digesting the substrate. When I say substrate, I mean the thing that we're fermenting.
Right.
And in return, it's producing all these amazing compounds. It's producing things like organic acids that are really good for the gut, really good for the microbes in the gut. It's producing things like dipolonic acid, which is really good for reducing inflammation, fighting cancerous cells. It's producing 13-MTD. You know, all these amazing little compounds that you can't get from food are being produced when you allow microbes to pre-digest the food for you.
Okay.
So that pre-digestion of the food allows the enrichment of the food and drastically increases the nutrient properties or the nutritional properties of the food itself. So what a fermented food really is, it's a really dense nutritional food that supports not only the human physiology, but also supports the microbiome. Right, and the bacteria that do the fermentation, whether it's a bacteria or yeast, of course, there's a lot of fermentation with yeast as well, they do not survive the gastric system. They cannot make it past the pH of the stomach and the bile salts and the pancreatic enzymes to go and colonize in your gut. These are microbes that have specialized and have developed the capability to ferment in a container. They are not microbes that are designed to live in the intestinal tract and compete with 100 trillion other microbes that are there. So we've tested this. We're actually working with a kombucha company right now. We've tested all forms of sauerkraut. We've tested all types of kefirs, kombuchas, all the types of popular fermented foods. None of those microbes survive to the gastric system and end up in colonizing in your gut. So by that, they don't meet the scientific definition for a probiotic. However,
Okay.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. No, you keep
However,
going.
a fermented food is a very important source of nutrients for the microbes that live in your gut.
Okay, so all I was going to say is that people, they come up to me and they're like, "But Charity, I can't even believe you're saying this because I feel so much better when I have fermented food." But it's exactly what you're saying. Well, yes, it's great. It's a great, rich source of nutrients, even for the flora in our gut. But it does not have the ability to colonize. If I'm hearing you right, it does not have the ability to colonize the bacteria that we really need to be growing throughout our body.
Absolutely. So let me give an analogy, okay? So I use this analogy quite a bit in order to really understand the microbiome and what are the things that affect it. So let's imagine our gut microbiome is a really fertile garden, right? There's 1,000 different plants in the garden. Of course, there are going to be weeds that are growing in, and there's, every once in a while there's a chemical spill that affects the soil and kind of messes up some of the good plants and allows for weeds and unwanted plants to grow. So there's always this ecological balance that's going on, right? And we're always trying to make sure our garden is healthy, make sure the diversity is good. Fermented foods are like fertilizer to the garden. Right? So when you consume fermented foods, it's like going in the garden and putting down fertilizer to support the growth of all the good plants and good, which in turn is a good bacteria. Okay. Now, true probiotic, one that can survive through the gastric system, the small intestine, get in and colonize and affect change within the microbiome, is like sending in a gardener. That gardener is an intelligent microbe that can go in, it can directly pick out the weeds. It can actually specifically enhance the growth of very specific species that are underrepresented. It modulates the immune system. It helps the digestion of foods once foods get in. It reduces inflammation. It helps the bowel movement go along. That's a gardener. The gardener is going in and creating an effective change within the microbiome or within the garden in this analogy. And the fertilizer is the fermented food. So you really need both. And awesome. That's the real key. Now, if you were to ask me, would I recommend people do their own fermentation, their own fermented foods, or go out to your local, health food store and buy one of the probiotics out there, I would say do your fermented foods. 98% of the probiotics in the health food stores and online and all that don't really do much of anything. So you're much better off doing and consuming fermented foods at home, or purchasing it and consuming it, rather than the vast majority of probiotics out there, because most of the probiotics out there are unclassified bacteria. The dosages aren't right. They have high degrees of attrition. It's just a bunch of hodgepodge, what we call a kitchen sink formula, right? But there are few strains that have been really well identified, like the Bacillus endospores, that do work as very important probiotics in the gut, and you do need exposure to them on a daily basis. Those are the ones that are important to take as supplements along with your fermented foods.
I think that's the best definition I've ever heard anyone use in terms of recommending fermented foods. It's going to be better than buying something that's not going to do anything for you anyway. So take the time to get the fermented foods.
Yep.
Okay.
And let me give you an analogy, or not an analogy, but let me rate the hierarchy of where these come in to human evolution, right? So we know, people who are really familiar with fermented foods know that humans have been consuming fermented foods for thousands of years. I think the earliest recorded use of fermented foods is somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000 BC, so 8,000-9,000 years ago. Fermented foods have a long tradition. It's been documented in ancient Babylon, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt. People have been consuming fermented foods for a long time. So it's a very important part of our human culture and evolution, and how our microbes evolve within our gut. And also the way we get a lot of nutrients, because a lot of nutrients, we can't access them from the foods we eat. We actually require microbes to pre-digest those foods to allow us access to those nutrients. So fermented foods have a really important foundation in our health and wellness. So that's about 10,000 years of practice in the fermentation area. Now, when we look at important microbes in the environment that we should be consuming every day, that act as real probiotics, we're looking at the Bacillus endospores. They have well over 3 to 5 million years of history in being consumed. So those actually came before fermented foods. These are Bacillus endospores that exist in the natural environment. Glacial ice core studies have proven that they've been in our natural environment throughout the course of human evolution. Our ancestors have been consuming them in large amounts through just being in the environment, through dust, through vegetation, through drinking out of rivers and streams. These act as the natural probiotics that the nature has created for us. They're the ones that survive all the way through, colonize, and affect change. So they came before fermented foods did. So it's extremely important to put those strains back into your daily diet along with the fermented foods. They work in concert to give you overall health and wellness.
Yeah, that's great. And what I've learned from talking to you and my own research is that, unfortunately, from just the processes that we have kind of evolved to naturally with our food, with what we've done with our soil, with just the sources of the things that we're consuming, little by little by little, we've kind of built up this wall between us and these organisms that are, have been incredibly important. We've kind of built this wall, and so we've got to find a way to reintroduce that to our body, because there is such a heavy need. I didn't even know how many things in our body are dependent on these microorganisms. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, people need to hear this stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, an article just came out at the end of December in U.S. News and World Report, so a very big mainstream magazine, if you will. And I was heavily quoted in that article because I'd contributed a lot to it. And the title of the article is How Germs and Hookworms and it can be healthy for you. And it really addresses the whole idea of the hygiene hypothesis, right? How we've created this big barrier, like you mentioned, between us and these really beneficial microbes that we're supposed to get exposure to. Now, I would say you wouldn't have to take those microbes as supplements if you were living on the side of a mountain, living in the dirt, right, getting yourself exposed to the natural environment, but we don't anymore. And because we don't anymore, and we still need those microbes to modulate our immune system, to control the microbiome, to seal up our leaky guts, all of these things, we unfortunately have to take them in supplement form. So those keystone strains, the ones that are absolutely crucial to the function of our digestive tract, our immune system, our hormonal endocrine system, all of those things, those have to be taken in supplemental form. And then you add the fermented foods to add the proper fertilizer to the microbiome, so you can really, really, get the benefits, the overall health and benefits from a healthy digestive tract.
Okay, that's perfect. Well, before we closed, I just thought I should just throw it out there. Yes or no, yogurt is a fabulous source of probiotics?
No, not at all. Yeah. And the vast majority of yogurts in the store right now have more negative things to them than benefits. Of course,
Right.
they've got sugars and artificial flavors and coloring and all that. We've tested many, many yogurts. None of them have surviving bacteria in it. There was a great study done actually on a high quality fermented yogurt that actually has clinically proven benefits for gut health, right? So this is a fermented yogurt with live cultures in them. Now, the word live culture is used to convey the idea that you're getting probiotic bacteria with it. Now, this clinical trial that was done took these live culture yogurts and they split it into two groups of people. One, they gave the live culture yogurt to, and they measured the benefit, and they saw that, yes, it did give you the regulatory benefits, the bowel movement benefits that you typically see with the fermented yogurt. Then they took the same yogurt and then they heat killed the strain. So they purposefully heat treated it to kill all the live cultures, so it's nothing but dead bacteria in there. They gave it to another group of people and found they got the same exact benefit. So it didn't matter whether those strains were alive or dead. It was what was actually in the yogurt, the substrate, what happened during the fermentation process, all the important nutrients that are produced during the fermentation process. That is what is giving you all the amazing gut benefits. And that's really where the magic is. It's in the substrate. Same thing with kombucha. One of the reasons we're working with the kombucha company right now is they want to add back these spore-based probiotics to the kombucha, because they know that by the end of the fermentation cycle of the kombucha, most of those microbes are dying off, and they die off very quickly. And then when you expose them to gastric acid, the microorganisms die off. But of course, all the organic acids and all that are in the kombucha have huge benefit, but they want to add live probiotics back into it, ones that they know will survive through the gastric system. So they have the first kombucha with real probiotic therapy to it. So it's a new area that we're going into, but it's really important to have both. It's really important to have your fermented foods to give your gut that fertilizer that it needs, but then it's really important to have those spore-based probiotics that act as a gardener for your garden and goes in and regulates the whole environment.
Yeah, I find that, it clicks for me. Like, I find that fascinating what you just said. I never, ever would have thought that the bacteria goes in, does its job, ferments that food, and then dies. But what's left over, that's what it was supposed to do. There's really good nutrients. It did exactly what it's supposed to do. But what that tells me in my mind is, well, it's two separate categories. The fermented food did what it's supposed to do. That bacteria has now died, but it's left over exactly what we need. And an entirely separate category is a probiotic that can colonize the large intestine. Two totally separate things, both incredibly important to our body.
Absolutely. Both should be done. It's not one or the other. You should do both. And that's really the key. Our ancestors did. 10,000 years ago, our ancestors were getting huge exposures to these actual colonizing probiotic bacteria from the outside environment, and they were eating fermented foods. They were doing both.
Love it.
Most cultures do both. Most ancient cultures, if you look at nomadic tribes, if you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, whether it's a Hadza tribe of Tanzania and Papua New Guinea, they do both. They do fermented foods and they get huge exposures to these strains. There's no reason why we should be doing one or the other and not getting the full benefit.
I love it. Well, this has been great for me. I could talk to you all day and all night. Hopefully the people watching are like, okay, we understand, we got our dose. So thank you so much for clarifying some of these things. I appreciate it so much. And hopefully we'll see more and more of you, and we can offer more videos, because I feel like educating the public is important to you. It's important to me, and just something that it really needs to be done, especially on this topic of gut health, which is so important.
Absolutely,
So
because confusion in this area leads to limited amounts of health benefits. Because when people are confused about these things, they're not taking advantage of everything they have at their disposal to improve their health and wellness. When they have the knowledge and they have the understanding, then they really can go after the full benefits of really improving your gut using fermented foods, the right probiotics, and all that. So, absolutely important. Thank you so much for the opportunity
yeah.
to do this.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Until next time, we'll see you
Thanks. Bye bye.
later.